Everybody that's listening to us on the podcasting sites, we greatly appreciate it. Like, subscribe, share. So please do that. We have a very special guest, returning guest, Darius A. Russ, DariusARuss.com, talking about all news economic and also about election 2024. Talk a little bit about the war in Ukraine, war in Israel in general. And we're going to kind of do this more often because we haven't had Darius on quite a long time. I know he's doing a lot of things as far as his time is he's very unavailable, I guess I should say. So uh so we'll move forward with that. Anyways, please again like, subscribe, share. Darius A. Ross, DariusARuss.com. Darius, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate your time tonight.
Pleasure, Rob. I appreciate being here.
So let's kick this around, Darius. So the economy doesn't look good. Obviously, inflation's high. Well, as far as that goes, the stock market is a topsy-turvy game I would say every month, but it seems like it's every day, every week where it's up and down, up and down. So we obviously feel and know that something's going to happen. Obviously, you're not Jesus Christ or Nostradamus, so we can't say an exact date, time on that. But would you tell the audience what you're hearing and seeing from people in general about the economic news?
Right now, what we're looking at now, and I'll go out on a limb and make some predictions about what's going to be a hit for us probably over the next 12 to 48 months. We're going to look at a stock market correction, and one like one we haven't experienced before, and probably a thousand times worse than 1929. We're looking at probably a market correction, probably about 25,000 to 30,000 points. We're going to end up right back at where we were before 2008. So there's going to be a lot of carnage, a lot of pain, and it's going to be real estate, stocks, bonds, securities. The office building market is already showing the cracks in the system. Mm-hmm. The CMBS's collateralized mortgage obligation debt is now at a point in time where most investors are giving back the keys. So we're going to be looking at buildings throughout the country just sitting vacant and empty, bargains. As far as the stock market itself, a lot of investors are going to get hurt, especially those that are over leveraged. The real estate market, again, like I've been saying for the longest, 30, 40 million homes will be foreclosed on. People that are heavily in debt, the thing to understand there about the election is this. It will be Donald Trump by a landslide. I will guarantee that he will probably end up with probably 270 plus electoral college votes. So he's going to be in there by a landslide.
Okay. So there are, and I'm on Drudge right now, and this is not a Republican site. It does have news articles from all over the country, all over the world. One of their top stories says, and if I can just get it up here so we can talk about this, it says, among likely voters, Biden 49, Trump 45. It also says Wall Street is predicting a Biden victory. But there are also some issues in Trump's favor. What do you think about that, where Wall Street is pushing towards thinking that Biden is going to win? As far as in the correct terminology for this, it says there's a stock indicator predicting a Biden victory. So what do you think about that, with Wall Street pushing forward with, their inside guys are saying that Biden's probably going to win, where it seems like if you watch the news and look at the issues, it seems like this is Trump's election for the taking.
Here's the bottom line to it. When you look at it from Wall Street's perspective, that is a situation basically to maintain investors' confidence. Investors need to be very confident with the market. The Trump election will basically put people very skittish. They would be afraid to continue to invest in the market because nobody really knows what his policies are going to be. But let's play with it like this. For example, in Israel.
But don't we really know what his policies are? Because he was already in president for 4 years and nothing happened.
But this time there's going to be a little trick. The trick to it is now he's understood how to play politics and how to be quiet. And one of the greatest things about that is being quiet and being able to do things in a subdued manner. So here's what I'm saying is going to happen. We're going to end up with Israel and Palestine in a two-state party. That's what's going to end up being 2 states. We're looking at right now the Gaza situation, right? The World Bank will take 40 years to rebuild back the Gaza Strip. The Ukraine, Mr. Putin will take the Ukraine hands down. It's already done issue. They've already pretty much destroyed that area. That's another 40 years of rebuilding. So with that being said, that's already on the table. Okay. Again, the stock market is basically saying investors' confidence. Investors will be confident. Now, as far as Trump is concerned, Mr. Trump's position is this. He is going to do what is in the best interest of himself and whoever his party constituents are, as well as his investors, as well as the individuals that are supporting him. So guess what? Immigration is the next thing on the table. By and large, this mass immigration policy, will that work? Partially yes, partially no. But what will work will be the, if you want to call it, debt restructuring. I'm predicting that the bankruptcy laws will be restructured. And if the bankruptcy laws are restructured, there are going to be a lot of people hurt by the losses that they're going to incur in the stock market, which means that for going bankrupt, they won't be able to go bankrupt, which will put them in a situation where the litmus test will basically destroy a lot of households, economically speaking. So a Trump White House is going to guarantee a lot of changes that people aren't expecting.
Okay. So as we kind of continue on, I do want to talk about the credit card debt crisis. It's really out of control. When we talk about that, including that into what's going to go on with the stock market, what are your predictions on that? Because it seems like there's going to be a lot of homeless people if the stock market really tanks and all these people are in credit card debt.
We have 106 million people unemployed right now in this country. No, 106 million. Now, you can check that fact out because the bottom line of it is that's 106 million people unemployed that are not employable. When I say not employable, they're not looking for jobs because jobs are paying $30, $40 an hour. People don't want the jobs now because they don't want to even think about this whole concept of working again. They want to work, but not under the circumstances of what most of these companies are offering. So if we look at that for a moment and we look at able-bodied American men, there's probably a discord there, probably 30 to 40 million able-bodied men that don't want to work in the current job market. You have people that are retiring. Almost 70 million boomers are retiring over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's going to have a huge punch in the market. Having said that, with unemployment actually somewhere around 15%, we're being told unemployment is 3 or 4% nonsense. That's not including people that are not working. That's just including the people that have just recently been unemployed. And if you take note of all the stores closing, 3,000 or 4,000 stores closing at a time, that's thousands of people. So when we look at that, we have a problem. And we have a major problem. And so what happens when all this debt can't be paid back? Credit card debt hovering somewhere around 10 to 12 trillion dollars. The government debt, $40 trillion heading toward. It's unsustainable. No country has ever had debt that high and has been able to sustain itself. Look at Great Britain, look at Japan. Japan still hasn't come back yet.
So it's just going to be a homelessness issue. Is that what you're saying?
We have homelessness in this country at a level that has never been before. In places like Bangor, Maine, I've been up there and looked around. You have homeless encampments, right? All over the place. You have New York City, you have Chicago, you have Detroit, and on and on. We have something that is not called homelessness now. You have able-bodied people that are able to work and would have been able to work, but because of the fact that they lost their jobs or because of the fact they got laid off or because of the fact that at the end of the day they couldn't sustain maintaining rent, they're homeless. It has nothing to do with the fact that they want to be homeless. They have no other choice because the immigration crisis is one thing. We have Americans here that are homeless because they can't afford to stay in an apartment. The average apartment in this country is over $2,000. People are only making $2,000 in 1 month.
Will there be a correction on that or no?
Absolutely. I will guarantee there again, the average rent in 15 months will be $4,000 average throughout the country, no matter where you are.
So how is that a correction if it's going up?
That's a correction for the landlords. That's not a correction for the tenants.
Right. Well, I was asking for the tenants.
For the tenants, it's just going to mean we're going to be looking at a ongoing apartment economy. So that means you're going to have more and more people that are going to be sharing homes. So you might have 10 or 12 people in one apartment that are not necessarily related to each other, subsidizing. They're renting rooms out just to maintain existence.
Yeah. So what is going to go on with all these houses that are going to become vacant due to this crisis then?
We're going to be looking back at the crisis that we had in the 1980s, Resolution Trust. For those of folks that don't remember that, there were thousands of homes that were thrust on the market. And a lot of those homes are just torn down and still sitting abandoned to this day. If you want to look at something to get an idea, look at Detroit. Detroit still is beginning to recover, but it's taken almost 2, 3 decades. We look at Baltimore, same thing. Vacant, desolate cities. We're going to be looking at that kind of thing across the board. Las Vegas was the same thing, desolate cities. We're heading for something that has never happened before. And no one really sees it and is understanding it. So they're looking at us pundits and saying, this is insane.
But would you say this is because of the debt crisis going back towards Bush and Iraq and Afghanistan where this started? Or would you say this was going on, but it was kind of in control? And then when 2020 came on and all the spending, that was the catalyst that broke the camel's back.
This goes back to probably shortly after the Eisenhower administration and through the Johnson Kennedy administration, all into Nixon and the Carter, the Clinton, and so forth administrations. At the end of the day, war is unsustainable. You can create situations, you can go in there and neutralize it, but you can't sustain. And America has done one of the most interesting things that modern history sustains. You cannot go along into a prolonged war. Colin Powell said it best when he said to President Bush, if you break it, you own it. At the end of the day, you cannot go into these prolonged wars and spend decades into a country. It's not designed that way. You can go in there and spank the country. You can send special forces in. You can do what you got to do, extract. You can do surgical extractions, but you cannot sustain long-term wars because the debt has to be maintained. Large companies are making a profit on the process, but you can't maintain these long-term wars. It's impossible. No country's ever done it.
Yeah. Again, Darius A. Ross, DariusARoss.com. As we continue on, Darius, I do want to get into a couple other topics. There was an article I just read before we came on, just before we get into the next topic. It says, no turning back. This Wall Street bear is predicting the biggest market crash since 1929. That was an article on Drudge. And obviously, Drudge doesn't write articles. They just produce articles from other legitimate websites. So those talking points are coming out from what you just stated on the air here. I want to talk about gold and owning real estate when this crisis hits, obviously more sooner than later. What is better, to have either or to have both, or maybe have some other item to make sure that you have this on hand? So what would you recommend? Gold, real estate? What else would you recommend to have on during this crisis?
From my vantage point, the portfolio that I'm dealing with now is a mixture of all. Being in a situation where you have blue chip stocks, right? That's always a pretty good thing because, you have very few blue chip companies that get real helter-skelter as far as
when you talk about blue chip companies, give the audience some of these companies' names.
You would say like AT&T. General Electric now has kind of been iffy. The IBM is pretty strong, the Microsoft and so forth. The companies that have been consistent with their dividends. They haven't been giving you astronomical amounts of money, but they have been consistently paying the dividends, consistently maintaining their shareholders' portfolios.
Disney is giving dividends now. What's your take on that?
Disney's situation is Disney's going to become a media company, period.
Right.
It's going to get out of the, you and I have talked, out of the park business. I can guarantee over the next 3 or 4 years, they're going to get out of the park business. It's not conducive long term. But as a company, absolutely. But from my portfolio perspective, stock, you want to say about 10%. Real estate, I would load up on somewhere around 30-40% because people have to pay rent. We're going to be in an apartment economy. Apartments are going to be the next 30 to 40 years. People are going to be going to rentals versus trying to own because it's going to be next to impossible to own a home. $300,000-$400,000 is the starting range for basically millennials to start owning a home. Most of them don't have the money.
So let me ask you, just to interject quickly. So when we speak about apartments, so we have the apartments, obviously. There are things called townhouses now as far as that. Are you including townhouses in with apartments or no?
Yes, absolutely. Because some of those townhouses are basically, apartments as they are. They're just designed as, 1 level or 2 levels.
Fair. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And as far as gold is concerned, definitely I keep that in my portfolio as far as 5 or 10% there. Because gold is now about 2,300, 2,400 per ounce. So basically, I would say gold is going to be surging possibly as high as 5,000, per ounce.
What about silver?
Silver is good. I would say the thing about silver is I would limit my exposure probably to around 5 or 7%.
Okay. As we keep moving on to the next couple of topics that we've got audience questions on also, and I kind of just did a little mix and match here. We talk about Bitcoin. Obviously, that was very hot within, about a year or 2 years ago. Now it seems like it's cooled down. Maybe it wasn't ready for prime time yet. Tell the audience a little bit what your take on Bitcoin is. Is it down in the dumps now? Could it resurrect sometime sooner down the line? What do you think?
I'm looking at Bitcoin as a viable medium once it's actually accepted across the board by multiple governments. Some countries do accept it, and in that case, is doing okay. But here's what I would say about Bitcoin: limit your exposure to maybe 4 or 5% of your portfolio. Maximize, I would say, don't go further than maybe $10,000 in if you got to go that far in. And the bottom line of it is Bitcoin will be an acceptable alternative probably within the next 10 to 15 years. If you want to get in on early now, you can play with it now, but just limit your exposure because, again, it's still an unknown item as far as how it's going to play out. But I will say this: by 2040, I would expect Bitcoin to be somewhere around 100,000, hovering.
Because there was a lot of people that bought into Bitcoin early, and then when it took a dive, they lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
So,
Limit your exposure. Keep it under $10,000. Don't get crazy in there. 50, 60, $100,000. No, limit your exposure. 5, 10,000. That's okay. You can play with that.
I want to talk about the Trump trial. Obviously, you're in New York. You see and hear about this daily. What are you hearing and seeing on the ground as far as the Trump trial goes? I think it's a whole farce. It's a lot to do about nothing, and I believe it's going to backfire on the Democratic Party.
I would say right now, looking at Mr. Kennedy and the backdrop there, Mr. Kennedy is going to take quite a few votes from the Biden administration. So overall, let's look at the bottom line of Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden. I would venture to say that if Mr. Trump is actually prosecuted to the point where he is convicted of a felony, in all likelihood, he'll be able to admonish himself from all that and still walk into the White House and basically give himself a pardon. So it's not in the best interest of Mr. Biden to push that button or to allow even the prosecutors to get too far. So right now, I would venture to say that Mr. Trump is going to get a walk. They'll give some kind of slap on the wrist, and it'll be some kind of misdemeanor, something to that effect. It'll be lessened down the charges, and it'll be watered down. That'll be the end of that. But this is just basically a prolonged tactic to keep him from campaigning so much.
I agree with that because the issues he's had with real estate, every developer in the city of New York is doing the same stuff and has
Mm-hmm.
done the same stuff in the past. So it's a total joke. And again, it's a farce in general. Just talking a little bit more about the election in general. How does the Israel-Ukraine situation play into the election? Do you believe that's going to have a huge effect on the election? Obviously, we're seeing the protests at Columbia, at colleges all around the country for that matter. And it has had an effect with these young kids that are very brainwashed in this liberal hysteria. But besides the point of that, do you believe that's going to keep a lot of these young kids at home for Biden, or it's going to really charge a lot of the Jewish, maybe Democrat voters to vote for President Trump and against all this nonsense that's going on?
See, the whole Israel situation is very tricky because there are people that are there in Israel that have issues that are going on there, and both sides are very is interestingly divided. It's almost like national pride in some ways. So folks that would want to speak out aren't going to speak out, and folks that do speak out are kind of very concerned about how to speak out. So the bottom line of that situation is, if they roll into Rafah with a full-scale invasion and really tear the place up like anticipated, like they've done in the rest of Gaza, I can guarantee you those protests will be like 1968. And this country will go on fire, and we have the potential of a major civil war taking place among young people on these colleges. Because these young people now are a little bit more fired up and are going to get more fired up based upon the more terror and the more, nightmares that come. So the best thing that can happen right now is for there to be a peace accord like yesterday.
But that will affect Biden.
Absolutely. You know, if
Yeah.
at this point in time it does not come to a point of a peace accord before October, then I can guarantee it'll be a backlash to him.
How do you feel like that would affect Jewish voters in New York, in Florida, other places around the country that have a high amount of Jewish voters? Or even we can even play it both ways too, even a place like Dearborn, Michigan, where there's a lot of Muslims in that area. Obviously, it's a swing state, and we saw what happened in the Democrat primary when Biden was on the ballot, uncommitted, got about 20 some odd percent of the vote.
What we're looking at here now, like I said, again, goes back to national pride. If I'm a Jewish person, what's the likelihood that I'm going to go against national pride and or my ethics or my religion or my perspective when it comes down to my country? Because this is what the bottom line of it is. This is my country. And I'm not going to vote against my best interest. So that's going to be clearly divided along that line. The same thing with the Arab and the Muslim vote. It's going to be the same thing. It's going to go right down to the bottom line of it's what's in my best interest as my people and as my nationality and so forth. So I would venture to say the Jewish population here is going to watch very carefully and see how the Biden administration plays that. And those that are for pro-Israel, they're going to go straight accordingly. And those that are anti-Israel are going to go accordingly. And the Muslim population is going to basically say, if you walk in Rafah and you do the damage that you're going to possibly do and allow it to happen and continue to provide funding for it, there's going to be a backlash, big time.
Just hitting on Ukraine, is Ukraine a done issue as far as the election goes? Or do you see that Ukraine's maybe Putin does something with Ukraine that pumps that issue back up as far as a main issue in the U.S. election coming up?
The Ukraine situation was done almost a year ago because, truth be known, Mr. Putin could have walked in there and took the whole country over and not even, spin a shell. Okay. If he would have won in there with all the might that he needed to do and all the might that they had. Right now, it was a matter of let's see how embarrassed the United States can become if this thing plays out and whether or not the United States actually wants to do a saber rattling with us. So basically, this is just a matter of making sure that the Ukraine is so devastated and that Europe is no longer allied with the United States in its entirety because right now the US is looking kind of bad when it comes down to their allies because basically what this is actually saying is that you didn't save them. So if you didn't walk in there and help them out, forget the money, forget the weapons, you didn't help them out. So if you're not going to put boots on the ground, that's it. Done game.
Just ending with this, 20s, 30-year-old people listening to this, what advice would you give them as far as economic issues, the inflation sky high, gas, food prices, insurance, the list goes on and on. People are working hard. They're not making ends meet, as you just stated throughout the podcast today. What advice would you give them?
I would say again, as I've said on numerous other podcasts with you, they need to start peeling away any debt. If you have debt, you need to start getting rid of it. If you're too heavily in debt, now is the time to consider taking advantage of the bankruptcy laws and getting yourself out of debt, getting a clean slate, and getting yourself prepared to take advantage of the once in a lifetime opportunity as far as being in the investment game. Now, I'm not saying them to use the bankruptcy laws illegitimately, but I'm saying if you're so far in and you can't pay your bills, you need to figure out a vehicle to get out. Now, beyond that, you need to now start looking at side hustles, things that you can turn around and do and create more income. Because right now, we're going to be in a situation where what's going forward will not be jobs that you're going to be afraid to do. Because most people now that are not working aren't wanting to work because they're not getting their fair share of the American way. That American dream has become the American nightmare.
So you're saying the American dream is dead, like Donald Trump?
Unfortunately speaking, the American dream is not what it used to be 25 years ago. That's the problem.
I agree 100%. And I think it's time to end there. I definitely want to have you back on quite a more often than we have been doing it. I know you've been busy and tied up in a knot, but we definitely need to do this more. I think you bring a lot of education to people listening, and I think you're very beneficial to the people that do listen to the program. Again, Darius A. Ross, DariusARoss.com. Darius, thanks so much for always coming on here and bringing the knowledge that you do bring to the viewers and the listeners.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you. Take care.